They told me family dinners were sacred. That night, it felt more like a trial where I was already guilty. The Whitfield estate stretched its pride across the dining room. A table, as long as memory heavy with silver and crystal, ran beneath portraits of stern-faced men in naval blue. Candles flickered against gilt frames. Thanksgiving smelled of sage butter and the pressure of expectation. I wore my navy prep blazer because it was the only armor I had, though the cloth was thin and the buttons no match for judgment. Father stood glass in hand, his voice as sharp as any command. To Victoria, he declared, "She earns recognition before she even arrives. That is leadership." The family rose to their feet, a chorus of agreement rehearsed by tradition. Victoria basked in it, Pearl's gleaming smile steady as if she were born for crowns. When the noise dulled, I tried. The Naval Academy requested more of my records. They said, "Father carved the turkey eyes fixed on the blade. The Academy looks for presents," he replied almost dismissively. "Not errands." He waved for more wine, dismissing me with the same motion. Heat pricked my skin. Victoria tilted her head, her tone velvet-lined but sharp. "She's always suited for uniforms," she said sweetly. "Folding them, fetching things." Laughter rippled disguised as politeness. It struck like a slap. I hid my hands under the table, fists, clenched nails marking crescents. Mother passed me bread as if to cover the wound, but her silence was louder than the laughter. Only Avery leaned forward, eyes wide, whispering, "I believe you." His voice was small, but it steadied me more than applause ever could. Around me, conversation flowed again. Scholarships, committees, donors, anything but me. I swallowed water that tasted of glass. I could have spoken of mile times, test scores, mornings when I ran before the sun. But this room never wanted proof. It wanted its own echo. So I stayed quiet. I ate. I watched. And when Father's hand slipped and blood touched linen, I handed him the napkin without a word. Some truths stain whether anyone admits it or not. Later in my room, I opened my journal. The house still hummed with voices below, but here the air belonged to me. I sketched a shoulder board empty where stars might go. Then I wrote, ink bleeding heavy, into the page. "They think silence erases me. One day it will be the proof I've won. War gave me scars. Home gave me silence. Only one hurt more. The desert was a mouth of dust swallowing every sound. Night pressed heavy on our helmets, heat still rising from the ground long after the sun was gone. I was a lieutenant now, and the men looked at me for orders. They weren't looking at medals or pedigrees. They were watching the steadiness of my hands, the rhythm of my voice when chaos rattled the walls. We had 2 SEALs pinned inside a crumbling compound, insurgents circling like wolves. A younger officer wanted to charge. I raised a hand. "Wait, listen." Silence was the map when nothing else was clear. I heard the lull between gunfire, saw the glint of shadow where the roof sagged. We cut through the east wall, hauled our brothers out, and ran with bullets kicking sand at our heels. My chest burned, my leg bled, but they lived. That was the measure that counted. Back in Virginia, applause was loud in banquet halls, but muted when it came to my name. Reports mentioned the Whitmore legacy of leadership, though no one specified which Whitmore had been in Yemen with bloodied boots. At the family estate, my father raised his glass face, glowing under chandeliers. To Victoria, he declared, "Her voice inspires beyond measure." The guests clapped, forks chiming on crystal, while my hand rested on the unopened metal box hidden beneath the tablecloth. Victoria stood at the podium that evening, radiant in navy silk, her smile trained for cameras. She spoke of resilience, of listening in chaos, of knowing when to act, words I had written in a combat report weeks earlier, phrases carried across sand and sweat. They fit her lips perfectly, the audience unaware that they were borrowed. Each sentence drew more applause, each bow of her head another theft. Father's eyes shone with pride. My mother folded her napkin tighter. I did not stand. I did not clap. My silence was louder than any toast. I felt again the desert grit in my teeth, the weight of a seal on my shoulder as I carried him out alive. That was truth, though no spotlight touched it. Later in the quiet of the kitchen, Avery approached me. He was taller now, 15, with questions in his eyes, sharper than any adult's approval. "How did you know what to do?" he asked softly when everyone else panicked. I thought of the long pause before breaching the wall of listening for what others could not hear. "Training," I said. Then, after a breath and silence, "You listen before you act. That's how you see what others miss." His gaze lingered as if storing the lesson for years to come. The night ended with laughter echoing from the dining room, Victoria at the center, father's pride unshakable. I climbed the stairs, a lone metal box in my hands. In my room, I set it on the desk light, spilling across polished silver. I traced the edges once, then closed it firmly, pressing the latch until it clicked. "They will never know," I whispered into the still air. "But one day, they will see." They thought silence meant surrender. They forgot silence is where strategy is born. By 2022, I could read a briefing room the way a medic reads a pulse. Fluorescence hummed over the Pentagon table. A satellite image glowed cold. Questions orbited fuel flights and budgets as if emotion were contraband. When we broke, a colonel praised restraint. Restraint saves more than time, I thought. It saves ammunition. That night, a charity gala dealt in warmer currency. Victoria moved through the light as if it had been promised at birth. A donor asked about my work. She didn't glance my way. "A dead-end uniform job," she said, soft as perfume. "No one notices the ones in shadows." Laughter made a ring. I let it pass like a wave-breaking noise on the surface while the riptide gathered beneath. Michael lifted his palms near the bar. "Let it go here." I stepped into winter air, counted to 30, then returned to ground. I never lose a desk under a hard lamp, a cabinet of records immune to charm. I unlocked drawers and built a lattice of logs, after-action reviews, sealed timelines, public filings. I flagged the places where her speeches braided from phrases I had written under red light and grit. Anger is an accelerant. I needed range. Marcus and Torres arrived with coffee and the look men wear when they've already chosen. "Ma'am," Marcus said, standing until I sat, "whatever this is, it isn't yours alone." Torres set a photo on the blotter, our team in the desert relief, bending our faces beyond smiles. "When the time comes, we'll stand with you." I kept my voice level. "There will be a time," I said. "Not today." I mapped a city of favors and invoices. A grant labeled Community Resilience Media Initiative led to a nonprofit where Victoria chaired the advisory board. The vendor, Red Sale Strategies, LLC, shared an office with her brand company. Per diems were rounded up twice. Consulting fees appeared for an entity created just before the grant and dissolved a month after. The scans were muddy, but the initials on the cover letter were crisp: VW. Not proof. A door. I kept going. Avery walked the mall with me, books in one arm, indignation in the other. Why not confront her now? You could level the room. We crossed from monument shadow to streetlight. "Because justice shouted too soon becomes noise," I said. "Silence sharpens the blade." He absorbed it the way he once absorbed tide charts at 9. Inheritance can be a sentence nobody hears. The next reception tested the seam again. A hostess asked Victoria how she learned to listen between gunshots, and she offered my line with a saintly pause. I smiled. Smiling costs less than a speech. Back at the office, I replaced charm with chronology press clips against mission dates. The cadence of her quotes against the cadence of my reports. The hours that made plagiarism mathematically impossible. Michael leaned in the doorway, rain on his sleeves. "If you move," he said, "move in documents, not." Nights became patient work. I requested what was public, noted what could only be inferred, and let gaps suggest their shapes. A thin line item misfiled led to a purchase card used for flights that looped through cities where donors lived. The consultancy listed as recipient shared a registered agent with her publicist. Small cracks. Hairline, but hungry. By week's end, the wall above my desk was a quiet web date sums arrows ethics code, highlighted where the language bit back. I stood and listened. Foundations fail like this quietly, then all at once. I marked the invoice with a star and wrote first fracture. I opened the drawer and took out the field recorder I had carried across oceans, because truth, when spoken into a small machine, does not flinch. I pressed the red button and bent close so my breath would not be louder than my promise. The day they rise for me will be the day she falls. If you've been walking with me through every twist of this story, don't let go. Now hit subscribe so you won't miss what happens when silence finally speaks. The chapel bells tolled noon. They thought it was for her triumph. Instead, it rang for her undoing. The sound rattled through my chest, heavy as judgment. Stained glass colors spilled across the pews in fractured light, catching on polished metal's jeweled brooches and the straight lines of senators' shoulders. The Naval Academy Chapel had seen generations vow loyalty to duty and to each other, but today, its grandeur felt sharpened into a blade. Everyone believed they had gathered to crown my sister's rise. I knew otherwise. Victoria drifted down the corridor before the procession, her gown whispering across the marble like she owned the stone itself. She leaned toward me, her perfume sharp, her words sharper. "Try not to embarrass us in that uniform." She made sure her voice carried just far enough for those nearby to hear. The laughter that followed was genteel, polite, but each chuckle dug into my ribs like a bayonet. I said nothing. My hand brushed the sleeve of my jacket, the 4 stars stitched in place by years of scars, discipline, and silence. When the doors opened, sunlight cut across the floor in a radiant beam. I walked in quietly, without announcement, without pageantry. I took a seat near the aisle, close enough to be visible, far enough to be dismissed. The organ swelled, filling the vaulted ceiling, and I felt the hymn wash over me like ocean waves beating against iron hull. I stayed still, blending into shadow the same way I had at 100 family dinners, where my name was the last on anyone's lips. Then the master of ceremony spoke, his voice, clean, resonant, impossible to ignore. "Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Dana Whitfield has entered the chapel." Time cracked in half. In one motion, 200 SEALs rose to their feet, boots pounding marble in unison, hands snapping to their brows. The sound was thunder, contained a force so precise it rattled the stained glass above us. And then their voices broke like a wave. "Admiral on deck." The air itself seemed to collapse. Guests froze mid-breath. Reporters dropped pens. Cameras clattered against pews as flashbulbs ignited. The silence that followed was absolute, yet inside that silence was recognition, weight, and truth that could not be stolen. I saw my father's face tighten, the certainty he had carried for decades, finally stripped bare. His pride, long invested in Victoria, faltered under the immovable salute of warriors who owed their lives not to speeches or gowns, but to command in fire and dust. Victoria's smile quivered, her composure slipping. She tried to continue forward, but her steps stuttered as whispers spread like wildfire. Names shifted on tongues, hers, mine, and I felt the current change. For years her voice had filled rooms while mine was left in shadow. Now silence itself bent the room toward me. I didn't stand. I didn't speak. I inclined my head, a single gesture light as breath, yet heavier than applause. The SEALs held their salute unwavering. Their respect filled the chamber, leaving no room for her triumph. The flashes burned against my eyes as reporters pushed forward, voices scrambling over each other, until one cut clear, "Admiral Whitfield, care to comment?" I lifted the metal box from my lap, raising it high enough for the light to strike. My lips never parted. I let the weight of silence speak for me, for the years they had tried to erase, for the truth that required no defense. and I let the silence answer everything. They mocked the uniform as a dead end. Yet when silence spoke, it became the end of them and the beginning of me. The morning after, the city hummed not with bells, but with headlines. Every channel replayed the same moment, 200 seals snapping to attention, the chapel frozen in reverence. Anchors spoke my name with surprise, as though I had appeared from shadow overnight. But silence had been working for years, sharpening waiting. Alongside the footage, another story leaked documents tracing misused funds, contracts signed under my sister's name, discrepancies too loud to bury. My evidence slipped quietly into the right hands had finally found air. By noon, her kingdom cracked. I heard about the boardroom through whispers first, how Victoria stormed in demanding loyalty, demanding they shield her. But investors read the papers too. They saw the images, heard the salute, studied the reports. One by one, they cut ties. We cannot be linked to scandal, they told her. She had built her empire on speeches and borrowed pride, and now those pillars collapsed with the weight of truth. Even my father, who had toasted her every step, stood silent in the corner. His pride had no defense left. That evening, I returned to the Whitfield estate. The same halls that had once pressed down on me felt different now. Victoria found me in the garden where portraits of our ancestors had never reached. Her eyes burned, voice brittle. "You betrayed me. You waited for this." I looked at her. The sister who had mocked uniforms turned my words into applause lines, made silence into my cage. My answer came soft, steady. I said nothing. Truth spoke for itself. Her shoulders sagged. The accusation had nowhere left to land. She turned away, the weight of her own arrogance dragging behind her like a torn veil. When she was gone, Avery stepped out from the shadows of the oak tree. His voice trembled, but his eyes held steady. "I understand now. Silence isn't weakness, it's a weapon." I pressed something into his palm. My old academy pin tarnished at the edges, but whole. "It's more than a weapon," I told him. "It's a legacy. Learn when to keep it, when to wield it." As the sun bled into the horizon, Marcus Torres Briggs and Ramos joined me in the garden. No cameras, no microphones, no audience this time. Just comrades who had stood in fire beside me. Without a word, they raised their hands in salute. Not a ritual of command, but of respect. I returned the gesture with a single nod. No applause followed. Only the quiet weight of honor settling into place. The silence was enough. They once erased me with silence, now silence is the proof that I endured. And proof echoes longer than applause. I carried silence for years, sometimes as a burden, other times as my sharpest blade. If you followed my journey, I ask you now, leave your thoughts for me. Tell me if you too have been erased, mocked, or doubted by those closest to you. Your voice strengthens mine. Comment below. Let me know what parts of my struggle echo in your life, and share your support, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever endured quietly. And remember, this silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes it is the ground where resilience grows and where true justice begins.